President Joe Biden's announcement yesterday that it is, quote, time for American troops to come home from Afghanistan.
We cannot continue the cycle of extending or expanding our military presence in Afghanistan, hoping to create ideal conditions for the withdrawal and expecting a different result. I'm now the fourth United States president to preside over American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I will not pass this responsibility on to a 5th. We went to Afghanistan because of a horrific attack that happened 20 years ago. That cannot explain why we should remain there in 2021. Rather than return to war with the Taliban, we have to focus on the challenges that are in front of us.
The president made a strong, clear argument in his words and gestures about this decision yesterday. And joining us today from the White House, President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. Thanks so much for joining us. I guess my first question to you will be, what will you say to the critics when the first thing goes wrong upon the troops' departure? Because there will be challenges ahead in the future.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. What we'll say is that the United States put 20 years of investment into Afghanistan to achieve a clear objective, which was to get the people who attacked us on 9/11. And after 10 years, we got bin Laden. And it has been 10 years since then. Al-Qaeda is degraded. The terrorist threat is reduced substantially in Afghanistan, and we believe that we can accomplish our counterterrorism mission with forces from outside Afghanistan, not keeping a permanent military presence in the country. And we believe that we have trained up 300,000 Afghan national security forces to take responsibility for their own country. We will continue to support them diplomatically and economically, but it is time now for the Afghan people to take responsibility for Afghanistan.
Jake, thanks so much for being with us this morning. The New York Times reported several weeks ago about the rise of ISIS in Afghanistan, not just Taliban expanding throughout the country, but also now a concern about the rise of ISIS in Afghanistan. Is that a concern that you and the president share?
We are concerned about both ISIS and al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We judge today that the level of threat from ISIS in Afghanistan, the level of threat from ISIS and al-Qaeda in Afghanistan is substantially reduced to the point where they cannot present today a direct threat against the homeland. However, there is always the possibility that that threat grows. And so we will keep our attention on Afghanistan for that reason. We will keep capabilities in the region to deal with that, and we will hold the Taliban to its commitments to not let Afghanistan be a base for attacks against the West. But Joe, a key point here is that the terrorist threat has become much more dispersed and distributed since we went to Afghanistan 20 years ago. ISIS is still in Iraq and Syria. ISIS is in Africa. Al-Qaeda is in Yemen and Syria and Somalia. So we need a force posture to deal with this terrorism threat that isn't all focused on a garrison in a single country.
Oh, it's been dispersed. Could you not make the argument it's been dispersed in part because we have had a presence in Afghanistan?
Well, if the argument that our presence in Afghanistan has led to the rise of ISIS and al-Qaeda in multiple other parts of the world, I'm not sure that's a good argument to remain. But what I would argue is that the conditions have changed dramatically across multiple countries and multiple continents because it's been 2 decades since we went. The world of 2021 is much different from the world of 2001. And we need to set up our foreign policy and our counterterrorism policy to focus on the next 20 years, not the last 20 years.
The president has said that there have been 4 presidents over 20 years that have dealt with troops in Afghanistan. I believe there have been 14 presidents over 72 years that have been in charge of troops that are in Korea, in another hot zone. What's the difference between those two? Are there not times where troops need to remain in countries because of the dangers that are posed by those countries?
Yes, and the Biden administration supports America's force posture in Europe and Asia and other parts of the world to defend our national security interests and defend our allies. But the big difference between Germany and Korea on the one hand and Afghanistan on the other hand is that we are not under fire at bases in Germany and Korea. We are not facing the possibility of being back at war with an armed military force on a daily basis, taking casualties, losing lives. We are able to sustain those presences at the request of the government and in conditions that allow us to both achieve our objectives and protect our troops. And the president judged that after May 1st, after the deal between the U.S. and the Taliban, the deadline set in that deal arrives, we would have to go back to war with the Taliban for the 21st and 22nd and 23rd year, and he was not prepared to keep American troops in harm's way when he believes that we accomplished what we set out to accomplish going into Afghanistan in 2001.
Jake, it's Willie Geist. Good to have you on the show this morning. What do you say to some of the veterans who I was texting with last night and people we've heard from publicly yesterday who, by the way, are, yes, of course, they're happy it's winding down. 20 years of their lives, they've lost their friends. Their lives have been forever changed by the war in Afghanistan. They don't want to be there forever more than anyone. But they just said, as a matter of fact, we'll be back. It may not be me, but somebody, maybe somebody younger than me. We'll have to go back to Afghanistan because it is what it is, and the Taliban will be what it is and was before we ever got there 20 years ago. So what do you say to them who are fully expecting that they'll have to go back to Afghanistan?
Well, the first thing I would say is just to thank them for their incredible service and bravery over the last 20 years. I had the opportunity to join President Biden yesterday when he went to Arlington National Cemetery, and it was an incredibly powerful reminder of their service, their sacrifice, what they put into this. And for 20 years, they stood watch and protected this country in Afghanistan, and for 20 years, Afghanistan was not used as a base for terrorist attacks against this country. We believe that we have developed a strategy that allows us to have the kinds of capabilities and assets we need outside of Afghanistan to suppress the terrorist threat coming from inside Afghanistan. And we believe that with the right level of attention and resources and focus, we can protect this country without sending forces back there. There are always risks, of course, but in the balance of risks between staying at war as it enters its third decade or taking the course that President Biden set out yesterday, we believe that not only honors the troops, it also protects the United States of America.
You may have seen, Jake, that General David Petraeus was very critical yesterday of the decision. He, of course, commanded forces in Afghanistan. He started by saying, of course, I understand the instinct to come home. Nobody wants to come home more than the men and women on the front lines who are fighting the war. But he said, quote, I'm really afraid we're going to look back 2 years from now and regret the decision and wonder if whether we might not have sought to manage it with a modest, sustained commitment that could have ensured al-Qaeda and the Islamic State would not reestablish sanctuaries from which they could attack the United States. What do you say to General Petraeus?
I respect General Petraeus, but I would say this. President Biden made a very powerful argument yesterday that a common theme in the criticism is we should leave Afghanistan at some point, but just not now. Let's wait till the conditions are right. That has been the logic that has kept us in this country for 20 years, 10 years beyond when we got Osama bin Laden. And if the conditions aren't right now, when will they be? 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, permanently? And if the answer is, as I think General Petraeus is arguing, permanently, then that would, to stay, you would have to accept a level of casualties of American forces killed and wounded on an ongoing basis, decades after we had successfully degraded the threat from al-Qaeda and we had gotten their leader, Osama bin Laden. And that was just not what the president found convincing on a going forward basis. And he believes that we have a way of approaching this terrorist threat and, as we were discussing earlier, the broader metastasized, dispersed, distributed terrorist threat across multiple countries where we're not stationing thousands of troops, and yet we're keeping our eye on the ball to protect our people.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.